That latest headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal, 3 service members killed in action, 5 have been wounded. And on that note, I want to bring in Mark Warner, the senator from Virginia, the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, who joins us on this Sunday morning. And sir, I have to start there. We heard the president warn that this could be something that might happen as a result of these strikes. Your reaction to this news on this Sunday that there have been casualties as a result of these strikes?
And I'm heartbroken for the families. I know our military will always perform exquisitely. The president warned there would be these potential for casualties. And but it begs the bigger question. Why did the president choose to start this war? And what are its goals? I mean, a week ago, we heard the administration talk about stopping Iran's nuclear program, which, by the way, the president claimed had been obliterated 7 months ago. Then we heard the president's people talk about Iran's ballistic missile capability, ability to shoot missiles at our bases or into Israel. And now it's evolved into regime change. So what I know as a member of the Gang of Eight on the Intelligence Committee, that there was no imminent threat to America. So what are his goals? He owes it to not only the families of those 3 deceased service members. There will unfortunately probably be more. He needs to make the case when you start a war of choice, why it was so critical. And is the goal Iran's nuclear capability? Is it the ballistic missiles, regime change? And let me acknowledge the fact that the Iranian leadership, the supreme leader's taken out. I mean, that is good news. I mean, this regime is awful. But I can tell you from the intelligence standpoint, we don't have great visibility about who or what comes next. So there is a very high probability that you could have even more violent Iranian leadership come in and replace the current leaders. You could have somebody that's even more brutal to the Iranian people. And now that the president has called on the Iranian people to rise up, and if they do rise up and they're suddenly butchered by the Iranian regime, do we owe an obligation to go in on the ground and protect the Iranian people? This is why our system says before a president chooses to go to war, you got to get a declaration, you got to make the case to the American people, you've got to ask Congress. None of that took place as he chose to start this war Friday night.
So, Senator Warner, to that point, I mean, we did hear the president use war in his speech, which is a power of Congress, not of the presidency. In your opinion, was this an illegal act?
I will allow others to debate legality. What I do know is that the Constitution is clear that when you go to war, the president has to come before Congress. We're not in a country where there is a single monarchical leader. We are a democracy with co-equal branches of government, and the people's representatives, which are the House and the Senate, need to weigh in, particularly as we now have crossed the line into American casualties. And again, our history of wars in the Middle East, at least in the last 50 years, is not great. And again, the president promised his supporters that he wouldn't get into a bunch of wars. This president has taken 8 different military actions in his second term. And ironically as well, just a quick point out that when the Iranian people rose up in early January, and there were literally hundreds of thousands on the street, the president said at that point he might want to back those people, but he was unable to because the military assets that should have been in the region were part of the aircraft carrier in particular was off the coast of Venezuela on another one of his military forays. And the European allies that would normally be with us helping put pressure on the Iranian regime were appropriately focused on the president's, I think, crazy folly about trying to take over Greenland. So the idea that America is going into this conflict with potentially only Israel, I know there are some indications of other nations flying, but it sure as heck not the coalition of the willing that could have been brought to bear if the president had made the case of why now and why this was inevitable.
The now late Supreme Leader warned in the run-up to all of this that if there were strikes, there would be a regional war that would develop. You were one of only a handful of lawmakers who have been briefed by this administration. You remember the so-called Gang of Eight. You received a briefing, as we understand it, on Tuesday around the State of the Union from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. I'm very curious how what you were briefed on forecasted what has come to pass here in the days that have followed. From what we've seen here, the way that this has widened, the prospects of this lasting not just days, but maybe weeks or longer, was something that the administration seemed to have weighed going into that briefing that you had a few days ago.
And was that discussed in the briefing?
Yeah, I can't go into what was discussed in the briefing. I can say that there were a series of options. At that point, the president had not made a decision. I was.
Do you believe that, sir?
Well.
Do you believe the president had really not made a decision at that point?
I will accept the word of Secretary Rubio. I was recontacted on Friday, but the idea of what was driving this, was it our timeline? Was it Israel's timeline? I have a lot of questions about, and there were clear questions raised by many about, well, what happens the day after, the week after, the month after? I never got an answer to any of those questions, and quite honestly, I don't believe anyone, even in the administration, knows the answer to what happens next. We do not have that great a visibility into Iran. This is, again, where the Israelis do, but this is where if we had not burned so many of our relationships with our European allies, who do have a diplomatic presence in Tehran, more people in country, I think we might have had a better visibility about what the opposition looks like. It appears to me that the opposition, while widespread, is not organized in a classic sense. So I'm not sure, the president says rise up and take over. I'm not sure who would rise. The people might rise up, but where is the leadership to take over, when I think the more likely scenario may be that you even get further hardliners that are going to be even more brutal to the Iranian people, and may then take their proxies all across the region and strike at American interests. And just to go a little bit even further, we have Kash Patel at the FBI distracted, flying around the country. We have the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, obsessed about relitigating the 2020 elections. What are we doing to make sure that Iranian proxies potentially in our country, or people inspired by Iran or this war, aren't going to take actions in the homeland? I hope that was factored in as well.
You bring up Venezuela, and I think a lot of people cautioned us after that effort to remove the president, getting Maduro out of Venezuela, that it was not a good analogy to look at what might happen in Iran. But there is the kind of similar sense of vacuum here, an unwillingness of the administration, the Congress, the country to get involved on the ground in a place like that. And we see how that's played out in Venezuela. Effectively, there's been a shuffle of leadership, but a lot of the structure remains in place. What do you make of the president's entreaty to Iranians that they should kind of make this happen on their own? There have been these airstrikes. What are going to be, or what could be, the forcing factors that do lead to some kind of leadership change there, barring having U.S. forces or others there to encourage that happening on the ground?
Well, my fear is that the president, because the military executed the Maduro operation so brilliantly, and the bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities was carried off extraordinarily well. Now, it obviously didn't obliterate their program, since they are trying to reconstitute. But again, it was done in a relatively painless way. My fear is that the president thought, well, that was easy. Let me do this again in Iran. I think most of the intelligence would overwhelmingly say that will not be as easy in Iran. There's not an organized opposition the way there was in Venezuela. The single strike was against a single facility back in June when our bombers took off. But the idea of calling on the Iranian people to rise up, if they rise up and they are brutally murdered by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces, what obligations does America hold to those Iranians who are responding to the president's call? I don't know the answer to that. And I think, again, it's incumbent upon the president to tell the American people
On this morning,
what
we
he
learned
thinks is going to
that
be our obligation.
on this morning we learned that 3 service members have been killed in action, 5 wounded. We have Ursula von der Leyen of the European Commission warning that the risk of further escalation is real. Great to spend some time here with the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia.